Okay. Zoom up. And I will resume from where I was. I believe I was explaining that we can have, instead of two separate lists, we can have one list in the HTML. So let me reopen that.
When you're thinking about this list, are you going to push them into an array, or are you going to make an object, or?
I think ideally we should be making a like we want to be able to store the values in JavaScript, and then from the JavaScript values we recreate the HTML. Because right now the way it works, which is working perfectly fine for our example, right, is we store everything in the HTML itself, and then if we wanted to get all of the items in JavaScript, we would have to look through the DOM. And a DOM is made to represent these objects. It's not made as a form of like storage, right? So in the future, we should work towards storing it in JavaScript, and then from the JavaScript we render the. But right now, I think this is that's not what I asked you, and I wouldn't expect you to do that. So right now, that's perfectly fine. I'm just rebooting this.
So the inputs now are being stored to HTML, and then we're just accessing it from there.
Well, we're not actually accessing them in the JavaScript, right? So once we get these two values,
Yeah.
we say, okay, this value is that, this value is that in the JavaScript, and then we just change how the HTML looks. We're not actually storing anything in terms of
Oh,
like.
got it.
So
Okay.
let me just. So what
That
I was
makes sense.
saying is, I'll just do some undos here to.
That makes sense, though.
Let me just quickly look at the history here. So this is what we were previously doing, right? We had two lists. I just wanted to make this clear because it was in between the crash. We had two lists, and we weren't storing things one item. We were just storing two items that coincided, not coincidentally, but yeah. So now we have this one item, and it won't look pretty at first, but if we go 1, 2, 3, then we see we have one HTML
Nice.
item. So I will do this a
And
very
how did you um refactor that
so let me go through and show you.
function?
So oh wait, I need to. So you see here, like when we have code like this, that is repeating almost exactly. We have, if you change these variable names, actually, I'm gonna do something a bit fancy. I actually wrote some code that compares JavaScript, and I'm just gonna demonstrate how this is basically exactly the same other than the variable names.
Nice.
Um,
How many hours a day do you code?
oh, I'm not a good example because I code like 12 plus hours a day usually.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, so, but
I gotta,
that's not any, that's amongst multiple things. So,
yeah, yeah.
so what we have here, we're going to put both of these in const. We're going to compare, and my JavaScript engine, very big flex, but it's okay, is basically saying that these two things are exactly the same because the only thing that's different is these variable names, right? The code itself is actually the same. The functions, we're calling the same functions with the same parameters, they just have different names, right? So if we see something like that happening, that's not a good sign. It probably means we can refactor it there. So we can either put it into a loop, or in this example, because we're doing exactly the same thing, we can just concatenate the values. That's what you call when you like a string concatenation is basically a fancy way of just like putting strings together, right?
Mhm.
So I will put some HTML in here for. Oh, actually, I don't know what tab is. 1 second. Shouldn't have to Google this.
Just to give it space.
HTML4 tab. Yeah, well, there's like special character codes. Wait. Yeah, there we go. So, like this. I think this should work if we do this a number of times. Then there'll be a bigger space in between them, and I'll save that. Refresh this. Oh no, I didn't. It's okay. I'll just do the ugly thing for now. But just to demonstrate, there's obviously much better ways of doing this. But just to demonstrate that this will do what we want it to do. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is why I wanted to do that, because the spacing doesn't work. But anyway, ignoring the formatting, we're now adding one item instead of 2 to the HTML. So this is definitely a step in the right direction, and we've eliminated the duplication. So now because we've done this refactoring up here, we now only have one list, and because we only have one list, we can just do this, right? Nice. Because we don't need to clear the second list. And this is still correct. Name U2, UL2, and I will call this, instead of UL, exercise list.
And so when you deleted the second redundant function, all you did for the initial one was add in calories value?
Yes, all I did was change what we're adding to the text node. Because now instead of adding 2 text nodes, we're adding 1 text node, but we're adding that text node with a concatenated string value.
Got it.
And so here, again, we're defining name again here, which isn't you. Oh, I see, that's why you want to redefine name. Okay. No. What we need to do here is, this is a more complicated scope issue. So I see, because we're using name here, right? So if we're using the same thing, because we're fetching it in the same way, we're looking at the document and we're fetching it by its ID. But the issue is, we want to get the name value once we click, because otherwise we're not getting the up-to-date value inside of it, right? That's the issue, because when we declare name up here,
there's nothing in there.
There's nothing in there, exactly. So what we're going to do now is basically, and then instead of declaring name by adding, const or let or var, when we do that, we're saying this is a new variable. Instead, we're just saying use the current variable. And then in this case, now we don't need to redeclare name, because we can just do this. And now we're using the current name variable. And which means we can also...
So once the function is called, then it accesses the name value?
Yes, exactly. So when the function is called, we basically get the current name tag, which has the current value in.
Right, and the only change in order to do that was, so we declared it in the global scope.
Yeah.
And then inside the functions, instead of declaring it again, we just use it as a variable.
Yes. So we just reassign the value, basically. So instead of saying let name, which means there's a new name variable in this scope, we're just saying name equals. So we're saying the current name has a new value. But it's referring to the same, because like a variable is referring to a thing, right? And we're referring to the same thing, we just want to update it. So if we want to get fancy, you could even, because we still repeat this code, we could just have we could just have update name. And then name element. So again, this is probably a little bit too much, but I'd rather show you too much than too little, so you can just, then every time we call this, we don't have to rely on, because here we're calling a specific thing, we're calling it, and we're passing a parameter, and in any of these instances, say we have name, or like we say name, or we go name, it's going to be incorrect, right? And if it's inconsistent, we say, well, why is it broken, blah, blah, blah. But if we're always using exactly the same thing, rename that to X, which is not my intention. There we go. Then we're calling the same code, and there's a much less chance of a bug, because we're only doing the same thing one time. So then here we can get rid of this, and this.
So update name element, and you put that in. Okay, global scope. Got
Yes,
it.
and we don't need to declare UL either because UL is now called exercise list, which is declared globally, right? And quantity. So this is not actually defined. So yes, so this should be called. We talked about it earlier. Quantity element. But this should also be up here.
In a global scope.
Yep. And then we need to do the same thing for this we've done for name, basically. Oh wait, no. Is this over the top? No. So what I'm actually going to do is because name and quantity work the same, right? So I could do this, and then I could do update quantity element, right? And then I call this get element by ID quantity. But we're doing the same thing here, we're just with different names. If I'm going too fast, let me know and I'll slow down.
No, these are when watching the tutorials, I've at least seen this idea introduced.
Yeah.
So I'm not.
So
I can.
but what's happening here is we're actually just repeating. Where's name gone? Oh, it's down here. Okay, we're actually just repeating the same thing, right? With name and a
And
quantity.
quantity.
Yeah, so I would call these elements, right? Because that's what they are. They're the elements. Because otherwise, as well, if we go here like, oh, I want to do quantity times 2. Oh, we think, okay, well, we're talking about quantity. We're not actually talking about quantity. We're talking about the element of quantity. And so
Right.
if we want to get the value of it, we need to do value. Whereas when it's called quantity element, if we do quantity element times 2, again, it's the whole thing of, it just makes things more simple to see when you can see, oh, that's why it's not working, because it's the element, not the actual value. But again, this is the whole thing. We don't want to repeat things, so I'm going to create a new object, which is input elements. And inside, I'm going to have name and quantity. Oh, wait.
And you're leaving those empty.
Quantity. And what I'm going to do for these is, because I have these update name and update quantity functions, I'm just going to make them update input fields. Then I'm going to return an object name referring to this, and quantity referring to ID quantity. Then I can just call this update input fields. And the reason now why I can call this name is because it's inside input elements. So I know it's an element. Oh, that should be called quantity. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So now when I want to reference name, I can just do input element dot name dot value dot, right? And here I can just do input elements equals update input fields.
All right. So instead of having name and quantity grabbing the element directly, we're now getting element and quantity, putting it into an object, so that when we're referring to it, we're referring to the location in the object as opposed to...
And the reason why I want to put these in the same object, because obviously we could put all of these in the same object. The reason I want to do it with these two is because these two, we use them in exactly the same way. We get their values, and we use their values to put something, and then we clear their values. Right? So
having them in the same object just makes it so not only neater, right, in finding where this information is, but what is the other advantage of lumping those two together
Well,
in an object?
the other advantage is we're not repeating code in the sense that where if I wanted to here, you can see I've just got get updated input elements, whereas otherwise I would have to do quantity element equals get updated quantity element. Right, and then I would have to do input element, oh no, name element dot get updated name element.
Right.
And then everywhere I would be repeating these over and over again, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
every time and now I don't have to do that because I can just look at the input elements, and then here you've got name element dot get that set value. So here we should just
And so
yeah. So now instead of name element, this would be name, and then this would be input element. And we could even write another function here, but I'm not going to go too overboard because otherwise I could just keep writing functions forever until But the other advantage of this is when we create a function, we're naming the function, and the name tells us what we think the function does. So we can read this as plain English now, right? We can say, okay, so we enter this event listener, and so click, there's a function. We want the input elements are the new input field values. Okay, so the input elements dot name value is this. Whereas if we're doing, document dot get element ID, like what does this mean? If I'm reading the code and I don't know JavaScript, what does that mean? I have no clue.
got it.
Yeah. Cool.
And so input the elements, and we're putting that at the beginning of this function because it reads it line by line. So it finds these elements by going back into this function here and finding it and then continuing. Is that how that works?
Yeah. So we'll get into this function when we click. And before we do anything else, we'll look at the input elements and we'll get the new values. So we could even write that here. So we could say, in a comment, we could say, we need to fetch the new values before the user values upon click to evaluate them. So if it's something's not clear, like I don't think over commenting is good, but if something isn't completely clear why we need to do this, then oh, okay, and then you can just read the comment. Oh, okay, we need to fetch the user input values. Okay, and then this is completely clear. Input values.name. Okay, so if the name has any characters and if the quantity is greater than 0, then we want to get an exercise item. And the exercise item, we're appending a text child of, this is a little bit less readable, but we can still see that it's the okay, and so we can see, okay, so we're appending the name value and the input element and the, did I call it calories? No, I call it quantity. And the quantity value, and then we have an exercise list, and we're appending an item, which is, and the exercise item that we just mentioned, and then we're resetting the input value of name to nothing. So now, like, I feel like people with very, very little JavaScript experience could understand what this is doing. Because it's so clear. And then here, obviously...
Is this also, this last line, input element.name value, and we're clearing that out, is that also going to automatically clear out the quantity?
No.
Okay.
So this wasn't there previously, so we would have to do input elements dot quantity dot value equals...
Input, let me see, input elements... Okay, so and you can clear that out still just referencing the location inside of the object.
We're still referencing the same thing, ultimately, right? Because we're calling this input elements quantity dot value, but ultimately, it's still, if you want to simplify this, whenever we call this, the equivalent is basically calling this dot value.
Document
right,
that,
it's basically the same code, other than the fact that this is updated and this isn't as of yet, but it will. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. It's much cleaner for sure. Nice.
Cool. Cool. And then here, we've got to do the same thing. And as I mentioned before, we could even make this a function. So if we, extract method, global.
And when you're going back and picking up the previous code that we written, that's coming from GitHub?
Yes.
Well,
yeah, so when you get, like, it's the same commands always. You just need to do git add a, git commit with your message, git push. That's the absolute, like, basics of getting things there, and then there's more complicated stuff, but for right now. And you can see that I've also added clear input values, which does this. Now, it's even simpler, right? Like, if we look at this code compared to before, it's...
Yeah. It's much less crazy.
And also, I think all of these ones at least, are not needed. Okay, finally, let's quickly... So again, we can just kind of do the same thing with these buttons, right? This is called button. We should call this instead
Right.
add button.
Right. Got it.
Does that change it here? No, it doesn't. Because the JavaScript variables, right? But if I'm just looking through here, it's not so. And then where's the other button? I don't see it.
There's
Button.
should clear. I don't even know. I don't see it there.
No, neither do I. I'm wondering how it works.
I mean, I have it on mine. That's weird.
This is bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah, I have it on mine. It's called.
Just want to make sure I'm on the most recent version because it's possible I accidentally deleted it. No, it's still working. Let me check. It's called button 2, right? That's what its name is.
Yeah, BTN2.
Oh, it's in a different file. That makes sense.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So now I just call this clear button. Oh wait, this is the other fucking file. That's why it's. Don't worry, I'm being dumb. And then,
Oh yeah, there was 2, right? Got it.
Yeah, and then here.
The second one that I copied in. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at the wrong one. And then this.
And as a question, do these buttons function the same way had I not wrapped them in a form tag? If I just had div, because when I was even before I started clearing the button, writing for clearing it, it still was doing stuff.
Yeah, this makes so much sense. This is why. Because I was looking at the other index and I was like, why is it resetting? But yeah, the e.prevent. Let me just quickly try something. I don't know if this will work, but
right. Yeah, let's see if that does. That's a good question.
And yes, okay, that is still working. And now we can get rid of this, I believe.
Ah, nice.
There we go.
Nice.
Cool. Great.
Nice.
Okay.
That's all.
So we've made great progress here. I don't want you to like go through and like recreate this perfectly, but kind of if you just want to go through and using some of the ideas we've kind of talked about, like try and make the code a little neater, and then I will tomorrow. Actually, I could do it tonight. I'll draft up a new kind of task to sort of expand on this, but
Sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, great stuff. I mean, it
all right,
perfectly.
perfect. No, thank you, and you explained very well. I appreciate it. Also, I'm definitely probably not going to be able to do 12 hours code, but
no, man. That's like I'm working.
How often
do
your students do? What's a good?
Well, I work like I do mentoring and then I work 2 jobs, so it's like. Yeah.
Okay, got you. Do you just love code that much?
Yeah, I really do. Like it's kind of pathetic, honestly. I really do love coding.
Fantastic. Yeah. I would. That's a great desire to have.
Yeah.
But for your mentees, how often? What's a good day's work? If I put in this amount of hours in code
it depends on how fast you want to go. I have one mentee who's like she works a lot, and I get a lot of questions constantly about her being held up. But I have some people who just do it more casually. I say some. I have 3 mentees. It's just a case of how much you want to do, and if you like. I think ultimately, if you're staring at code for sort of 6-7 hours straight, you're probably not getting much done anyway. I think, like when you're coding, it's best to sit down, like focus, try and like, because obviously when you're learning coding, it's like a pretty mentally intense activity. I would just probably try and recommend a block of 2 or 3 hours. If you want to do that every sort of day or two, I think you can make that's probably a good way to make great progress.
Awesome. All right, well I'll go through this and.
Cool. I've got 2 recordings, and there's no password leaks in these ones, and I'm too lazy to edit that. So these 2 will be going up live, and I will send you the link to them.
Thank you so much, man. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. See ya.
Cheers.
Bye.